welcome to Dawn Read Liner Notes from the reissues on Century Media. And we have come to the Closing Chronicles. And the reason I'm showing you the old card box is because I accidentally signed my own booklet. And that's what it is. So, yeah, here we have it. Let's do it. Brought to you by Magnesium Drink in Deserted Fear glass. Yeah! Under the lights, the Chronicles remembered. So here I am once more. I guess that is what I felt when I sat on my newly acquired Steinman upright piano in my bedroom at Skolgatan. I had been living in Örebro since May 1995. I barely knew the guys at my future employer Musikbörsen when I swung by their shop to buy a new piano and a pack of strings for my beloved Sigma nylon string guitar. As I paid for it, I proudly exclaimed, "I have an album to write." My Sigma guitar had been my writing partner since I traded it for a far superior Alhambra guitar with Anders Moreby at the end of the 80s. I have written hundreds of songs in it, and together with the brown Östlinden Almqvist piano, two important items in my imaginary museum about my music. The Steinman was my first piano. The Östlinden Almqvist piano remained in Finspång, where I would spend hours banging away on it in the living room every time I visited. One of the things I remember clearly about the whole situation was that I felt a bit uneasy about the fact that Black Mark wanted another Nightingale album. The first one had barely been released. To me, it was a one-off. Earlier this morning, before I embarked on these liner notes, my mind flashed back to the time before anything had happened with any of my bands. And I stood in my room and silently screamed Blackie's old mantra, "I want to be somebody." I wanted to be remembered. I wanted to be a respected musician, someone that other bands said they were influenced by in their interviews. All my waking hours since I was 6 years old had revolved around writing songs, and there I was, barely a teenager, worrying about my musical legacy. Fast forward, less than a decade later, and I was annoyed that the record label dared to ask me to do another solo album with pretty much a worldwide release. I have worked a lot on my arrogance since then. But I decided to say yes to the offer and started to write songs. Another vivid memory is yours truly standing in the kitchen, calling my friend Peter Edvinsson of Attention and Unicorn fame, to ask if he'd be up to help me with the album. Nobody was home. I often wonder what this album would have sounded like if Peter had picked up the phone that day. Then I decided to call my brother Dag. At this point, we had drifted apart a bit. I knew that having Dag around would steer the music far away from most of the songs on the first album, but I decided to give him a call anyway. The rest is history. Millencolin Coffee. According to the Unisound guest book, the Closing Chronicles was done between the 1st and 13th of April 1996. And I remember us having a good time. I had never done anything together with Dag in this way before. This was a true collaboration, and I know that Dag remembers a bit more from the creative process than I do. Still, all in all, it was a bit like all those projects I had back in Finspång, where Benny Larsson and I went down to the studio and formed the project, wrote a few songs, recorded and mixed them on the spot. But that stuff usually stayed unreleased and was something we did for fun. The vibe was the same here, but this was an actual album recording. And what we came up with here would go on to live forever and even be reissued by a major label almost 30 years after its inception. So there was some pressure, for sure. Another important tool in the making of this album was the purchase of the Roland XP10 keyboard. Bands like Gamma and Early Foreigner never went out of fashion for us, and both bands were a huge inspiration for this album. In the XP10 there were plenty of progressive rock sounds to choose from, and now we had them just a button push away, Kid in a Candy Store and all that. Now, let's take another walk down memory lane. One morning, I woke up feeling like the pillow had somehow crawled inside my right ear during the night. I could hear nothing on that side. Panic. I went to the hospital, which luckily was within walking distance from my home, and they flushed out a ball of earwax that was so big that the nurse asked for more nurses and doctors to come and look at it. They said the ear would be fine, but it would take some time before my hearing returned. I had no time to lose, so I started recording the vocals for the album. First up was Deep Inside of Nowhere, and I had never had to sing with only one ear before. It was nearly impossible to get the pitch right. The first line on this record will haunt me forever, and if you carefully look at the booklet, you will notice that there is even a comment I cut out from a review mentioning it. If you believe the good stuff, you also must believe the bad stuff. Then, finally, all the water was out of my ear and my hearing was back. With the treble knob turned all the way down though. But then came the long-awaited glorious moment when the ear went and I could hear treble again. Probably more than I had done for the last 10 years. Since this adventure, I have regularly gone to the ear doctor and had wax removed. That reminds me of another fine memory when some moron at the power plant did something horribly wrong and the whole city of Örebro went black. I had just finished a vocal take and had done some serious editing in my VS880. This was a painstaking process of setting lots of start and end points in the audio, staring at a monochrome display the size of a credit card, and all of a sudden, my Genelec speakers were suddenly a meter outside their cabinet, at a perceived million decibel, playing back a sound that reminded me of a super large didgeridoo from hell. Then all went silent. I had not saved my work on the VS880, so I knew all that work was lost. But had my equipment survived? I got the vibe there was a moment of 2220 volts instead of 220. I looked around and the whole town was out in the street checking to see if anybody had electricity. I went to Musikbörsen to see how far it had spread, and the staff sat outside the shop and had a coffee. After what felt like an eternity, especially since I was uninsured for such event, the electricity came back on, and all the equipment had survived, but not my edits. Since that day, I have saved my work so frequently that I actually wore out the save button on the machine and had to send machine for repair. And these are now the liner notes from my beloved brother Dag Swanö. Sometime in early 1996, Dawn called me and asked me to produce his next Nightingale album. I was quite surprised. I thought The Breathing Shadow was a one-off. The style on that album was very different from my musical horizon. I don't remember much more of what happened before I went to Örebro and the studio in the tower. We went to work and Dawn played me some rough ideas on the guitar. I made suggestions and we recorded a rough demo, which we sadly lost. Then we re-recorded drums and bass. I added some guitar parts, but most of the rhythm guitar is by Dawn. The whole thing went very smoothly and lots of fun late night sessions with a stop at the falafel place on the way home to Dawn. I slept on the floor and read stuff about UK and Asia written out from the new thing called internet. A while later I did my guitar solos, some of my best. I believe most of them are first takes. I'm always at my best on those. Then I got to hear all the rhythm guitars and added keyboards. Cool! We were pleased with the album, but the feedback didn't come easily in these pre-internet days. A year later I met Magnus Devo Andersson of Marduk and Overflash fame on a night out. He started raving about the album and I was a bit surprised. A few months later I got my internet connection and was even more surprised. There were a lot of the Closing Chronicles fans out there, and I am still one of them. Yeah, me and also my brother, of course. Okay, let's go to track by track. Chronicle the Chronicles. Deep Inside of Nowhere. Dog. The first song Dawn played to me. He started with a riff very similar to Lynyrd Skynyrd's Sweet Home Alabama. At the time, I played a lot of covers, and that song was a standard. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He had never heard the song. There were no guitars and the song was driven by a heavy organ riff. It's still there, but it became a guitar song. We needed a bridge between the first and second half of the song, so Don played 4 bars of straight drums and left it open for future ideas. When I did the bass track, I just kept playing and that riff became a part of the song. I had to learn it and overdub the guitars. I can't be more spontaneous than that. Nice bass sound on the album, my old aria. It was sadly stolen. Great song, one of our best. And then I say to this, yeah, I'm proud of the fact that I didn't know Sweet Home Alabama existed in 1996. My riff had a Celtic vibe, a minor key version of the riff from the aforementioned track, morphed with Wheel in the Sky by Journey. But the rhythm was identical. I still remember the moment when I remembered that we had forgotten to include that riff in the song. At the time, it was one of my few ideas, and I was pretty upset. But I think Dog once told me that he was happy I forgot it and didn't intentionally remind me about it on purpose. One of the first things I remember writing for the album was the beginning of this song. To get a fresh perspective on the whole thing, I placed my hands in a position with a scary number of black keys on the piano. I am what you might call a white key player on the piano. The occasional black key can be used now and then, but this was crazy. I was out of my depth, but to my surprise, the intro section in C sharp minor almost wrote itself. It felt a bit like when I discovered the D-A-D-A-D-E guitar tuning during the sessions for The Breathing Shadow. This most likely unique tuning would also be a part of my songwriting for almost all the songs on this album. Listening back to the song now, I hear the vibe from the beginning of Marillion's Script for a Jester's Tear echoing in the intro. We never performed the entire track live. We always went straight to the chosen to be part after a few bars of the piano and vocal part. Revival! And this is what Dog had to say about Revival. I don't remember much about this track, apart from the bass line. I didn't add much. Another great track. It's always a kick-ass live track. We played it every gig we did. And then I say to Revival. As I say in the introduction to this song on the live version on CD 2, I mentioned, although in Swedish, that I wrote this song on my Sigma guitar while sitting on the floor in the kitchen at Skolgatan. The album version is a bit different from the live version. The live version laid the foundation for the re-recording we did for it for the Nightfall Overture album. The verse arpeggio is in the D-A-D-A-D-E tuning here and was rewritten to work in a standard tuning. The second verse is very inspired by Queensryche around Operation Mindcrime. In fact, the way the bright string sound is cutting through the pretty nasal rhythm guitars and how the snare drum is sharp and short with tons of reverb is all a tribute to that awesome band. The choir part at the end is a nod to the intro music from the TV series Full House. It was by far the hardest track to get a decent remastering, since the rhythm guitars had a nasty peak in the upper mid-range. I used a Korg A1 rack for my guitars on this track, and Dog insisted on the Marshall GCM 800 with a straight vintage Marshall 4x12. Used on pretty much everything I recorded from the late 1980s to the late 1990s. And I think I switched to that tone later on the album as well. Eventually, I find a tweak that worked well, and now I can listen to this recording without having ear surgery afterwards. I had a huge problem with the vocals in the chorus. I'm unsure, but it might have been the first time I attempted to sing it with full power. I often go into a silent, more of a falsetto kind of voice when I sing along to the acoustic guitar when I write, and up until this point, I never checked if the note I had chosen were possible to sing with full power. In this case, the chorus melody was full of higher notes that I couldn't really reach. But I didn't give up, and eventually I hit the notes well enough to be a take. The problem was that there were 2 more choruses, and I was already sweating on the floor with an aching brain and stomach. That was the moment when I decided it was time for me to open that brick of a manual to the VS880 machine and finally learn how to copy and paste recordings from one part of the track to another. Moving forward with thoughts from a stolen soul. Dog is now talking through me. Dawn had this Rush-like riff, and I suggested the bass drums stuff behind it. We left a lot of parts in the track with just drums and a vague idea of what it should be. Then Dog had to go home, and I was left to my own devices. I'm surprised I managed to work with a hard disk recorder. At the time, I was working with reel-to-reel and never used a computer in my whole life. My first Atari ST came later that year. I recorded the heavy section and the Santana part, which fits perfectly. I think the track is a bit uneven, but it works in the context of the album. We played a shorter version live, which was the ultimate version, but I like the experimental vibe of the original. And then I say, it's funny that Dog mentioned a Rush-like riff. At this point, I had no relation to Rush at all, which is weird since I chose a big pad sound that is very similar to their Subdivisions track. Maybe this is why my love for them became so strong once I heard the right songs at the right time around a year later. I love this track, very Nightingale sounding, which might be a weird thing to say about your own music. But there are a few songs that have a certain vibe that encapsulate all that I think is special about a rather unique blend of pomp, goth and hard rock with a touch of prog. This song and Nightfall Overture have that sound. Fun fact number 1. During the mastering with my hero Peter in the Beto, I felt that the section starting at 1:43 was too long. So Peter performed a digital edit across a whole track. I had edited a bit on the VS880, but this was the first ever full track digital edit I had witnessed. You can hear the edit if you listen carefully, since the guitar suddenly gets a more open tone at 1:51. Fun fact number 2. I swear I can hear someone say, "What?" at 5:16. Probably the ghost that scared a lot of the bands that slept in the Black Tower we recorded it in. Next up, So Long, Still I Wonder. Dog. I remember we had a disagreement over the arrangement. I wanted a more modern touch, and Dawn wanted it the way it had become. He was right. Dawn. Thanks, brother. I clearly remember the moment when I decided that Unicorn was history. I was doing interviews at the Black Mark headquarters in Berlin. Between interviews, I decided there would be no more Unicorn albums, so I could use whatever I had written for Unicorn on the second Nightingale album, and this track was one of those. Ironically, Unicorn was never laid to rest around this time. We soldiered on until 1999, when we finally gave up the Ghost. Ghost. We were first Ghost, then Icarus, then Unicorn. You get it? Yeah. Good. I was really big on paying tribute to my favorite bands at the time, so the title is put together by So Long by Wasted, from the criminally underrated Save Your Prayers album, and Still I Wonder by Moxie, from their Moxie album. I can't remember the argument about the arrangement, but I'm happy that I could keep its intended vibe. I dig the guitar work on this track. There is this scent of Pink Floyd in there that I can't explain. I think about it every time I hear this song, both in my own and Dog's. The guitar solo section is definitely a top 10 Nightingale moment. I also really dig my vocal work on this one. Steal the Moon. Dog. Another kick-ass live song. I suggested that we should use the bass line from the verse as an opening riff. We needed a bridge. So I wrote the "And if I would die" section, complete with a vocal melody. But Dawn couldn't find the tape when he cut the vocals, so he made up his own. Also a great live track. Sorry, Dawn, that's me. One of my best guitar riffs. As you can hear on the bonus CD, this track started as an indie pop song with my one-man band Morion. I have absolutely no idea how this song ended up on this album, but I might have gone through all my unreleased material and discovered this one and felt that it could work as a rock song as well. Quite a lot of the lyrics are lifted from the original as well. It's always fun to play live. Also, it's a tough remaster since the original version sounds incredibly harsh, but now I think it sounds spectacular. And now the song Intermezzo, Dog. One of my early songs. Dawn wanted to include it, I had nothing to do with it, it's cool. And I have to say about Intermezzo, my first idea was to include Dog's track Kajor on this album. For some reason, the song's opening chord was something I always played on the D-A-D-A-D-E tuning, and I knew it would be an awesome Nightingale track. It never happened for this one, so I took another of my favorite tracks from Dog's massive catalog called Fontaine and turned it into a heartbeat sample, synth pad and vocal track. A bit too long for my taste, but the story needed to move forward and I needed playing time. And we did record Kajor later on, called Lonely, for the third Nightingale album, I. And next up, Alive Again, Dog. Started as a pretty standard song in the unicorn style. I don't think we intended to make a 9-minute song. When I recorded the bass, I just kept playing when the first part of the song ended. Dawn joined in on drums and we jammed. Then we started to put stuff on it. We needed some bizarre sounds. I went to the toilet and got lost in one of the zillion metal fanzines Dawn kept there. All these evil guys in dark forests in lousy quality pictures and stories about blood, darkness and fire. Very funny. When I finally got out, Dawn was lying on the floor, screaming into the guitar pickup with a lot of feedback and stuff going on. I said, great, let's put that on the album. And I say, another unicorn embryo that was born as a Nightingale song. When I remastered Edge of Sanity's The Spectral Sorrows, I find out that the intro of this song also featured the 1993 version of the outro, A Serenade for the Dead. A bit embarrassing to steal from yourself, accidentally. Like Dog said, it was not in the cards for me that it would be one of the longest Nightingale songs. I think it's alright on the album, the only non-metal song I ever released with just one chorus. Not sure how it happened, but I guess we felt that there was no way back to such a nice and friendly chorus after we entered the darkness with that menacing bass riff Dog conjured up. The 2025 version, which you can find on the bonus CD, is the version I wish we had done. But at the time, it made sense to repeat some melodies from the first album during the long jam at the end. It was subtitled The Breathing Shadow Part 2 after all. One thing that always bothered me in this vision is that the vocals in the second verse have some strange phase issues. I have no idea how it happened, but it's a bit ironic since I hate that kind of frozen flanger effect that was sometimes used in the late 70s, like on the vocals on the Other Side from Kansas. Okay, we're moving forward with the bonus stuff. Here we have a special album cover for the Childhood Chronicles. This is Dog in his room at the summer house with me and a wood guitar, looking at him. The album he's really looking at is Uriah Heep's Sweet Freedom, but for copyright reasons I switched it to some nice photos of me and Dog when we were young. Okay, this is what I had to say, or we had to say, sorry, about Childhood Chronicles. Dawn. During the sessions for the first album, The Breathing Shadow, my infatuation with goth rock was fading. In the end, it was an adventure into a new genre where I searched for good songs that hopefully could bring something to my musical DNA. Much like thrash metal, death metal, grunge and indie pop had been a few years earlier. I don't remember how I found out that the lack of goth on this album was a problem. Still, I reacted to it with the promise of 3 songs, which I remember selling to Blackmark as an EP. But in the guest book from Unisound, it's written that what we recorded would be a part of the second pressing of the Closing Chronicles. We recorded and mixed these 3 songs between the 23rd and the 26th of June 1996. And in the track by track below, you will find out more about the destiny of these rather unusual interpretations. Before the Dawn, Dawn. On the imaginary The Childhood Chronicles EP, Before the Dawn was definitely not the opening track. But since it is the only unreleased track of the bunch, I decided to give it pole position on this bonus disc. This is one of the Judas Priest songs I loved long before I was old enough to be a proper fan, with a battle vest with only Judas Priest patches and buttons. My oldest brother Ingjald brought Judas Priest to the Swanö family household when I was just a few years old, so I grew up with their music. Where the sin after sin I have endured part from genocide scared me shitless, songs like Before the Dawn would rock me to sleep. I remember looking at the album covers from their albums until Killing Machine in Ingjald's massive vinyl collection, spellbound by their mysterious layout, and still to this day the awesomeness of Sad Wings of Destiny, Sin After Sin, Stained Class and Killing Machine is unmatched by any other hard-rocking metal band. The other two tracks from this session were used for various compilation albums, but this one remained unreleased until now. The idea was to goth it up, but in all honesty, it sounds more like... The idea was to goth it up, but in all honesty, it sounds more like something that Billy Idol could have released. I love the clean arpeggio guitar part I wrote on the DADE tuning. The track is a lot faster than the original, so that is, of course, an important factor behind its short playing time of over just 2 minutes. Also, the guitar solo, which according to K.K. Downing's book was decimated on the original, was shortened to what Dog often describes as the shortest guitar solo ever recorded. The original mix of these 3 tracks had no audible hi-hat for some reason, so I went through the arduous process of adding it to the existing mix, and before every hi-hat hit was perfectly lined up with the drums, the hours had flown by. Oh, the things we do for our art. This was also my first ever all-digital recording, done entirely on the Roland VS880 8-track digital recorder, syncing up the Atari Mega 4 computer with a crazy 30 megabyte hard drive, and then mixed down to that. Sadly, only this track was transferred from the now long-lost DAT with the original mix on it to a TDK CDR audio disc. The master sounded great, and it sounds pretty much like I mixed it in the summer of 1996. And now Dog. I remember hearing this track in our older brother Ingjald's car on our way home from the cinema in the big town in '78. We saw the dark movie Midnight Express. This was the only Judas Priest track our dear father liked. He used to whistle along when it came on the mixtape in the car. I have never understood goth, so I didn't understand why we did those versions, but I did it anyway. We should have kept the solo in original length. I remember being there for the session, that's all. I guess we had fun, because we usually had fun. And the next one is C'est la vie, and I say. This is one of the songs to be played at my funeral. The other one is Easter by Marillion. So to say that I like this track is quite an understatement. It was originally recorded by Emerson, Lake and Palmer for their Works Volume 1 album in 1977. I'm not sure when Dog got hooked on their music, but I guess it was only a few years later. And then it made it to one of the many legendary mixtapes he made for me that became the most significant part of my musical DNA. Just like Before the Dawn, this song has no drums in its original version, which made it more fun to cover since it changed the whole vibe of the track without damaging the arrangement. I remember that Dog had to play the arpeggiated guitar. I tried for what felt like forever and never got the timing right. I only needed a few bars, then I could treat myself to the magic of copying and pasting digital audio on the VS880. But I think that Dog played the whole track from the beginning to the end without any need for a tilltajtare. C'est la vie didn't turn into the Sisters of Mercy-like stomper that I thought it would either. It was pretty naive of me to believe that any track would turn into the perfect goth song by having a robot-like drum machine beat and programmed bass, jangly guitars and a deep vocal on top. I love it anyway. Sadly, this track was the victim of a brutal sonic assault at some point. I searched for the original mixed, untouched by whatever that violated the only version I found, but sadly in vain. So I put on my restoration hat and did whatever I could to restore the sound to be like the other two songs of this imaginary EP. Now, when I check the final masters while typing this, I must say that I'm pretty pleased with how I turned that train wreck of mastering into something that sounds quite alright and pretty close to how it must have sounded at the mix stage. And now Dog. I remember when Dawn heard this in my car and got transfixed. It was the live version from the Emerson, Lake and Palmer LP In Concert. I think this was in 1983. Also in this case, my memory regarding this recording is blank. Next one, Return to Fantasy. Dawn. Luckily, this session's next and final track sounded great. The version is from the A Black Mark tribute album released by Black Mark in 1997. Uriah Heep is another band I grew up with. During the first year of my life, I was so scared of the eyeless dude with the spider web in his face on the cover of the debut album Very Heavy, Very Humble, that my brother had to keep his copy of the album in a storage room outside the house or I couldn't sleep. I loved Return to Fantasy the first time I heard it. I remember looking at the album cover while listening to the song. I saw the character from the cover riding with his wings on fire on the back of some mystical creature on his journey back to his planet Fantasy. Where the other two songs didn't have any drums at all, this one has a beat straightened out from a shuffle to a 4/4. And I know it upset some die-hard Uriah Heep fans who called us jerks on the World Wide Web. I love it this way and stand by my tribute to this awesome track, which is more gothic than the original. Lasse Honk played some incredible spur-of-the-moment rhythm guitars. Listen to the Knopfler-like lick at 1:30 and a fantastic solo on this track. I knew Lasse from the Musikbörsen shop where I bought all my gear. I would eventually start working for him. And I knew he was a big Uriah Heep fan. In fact, he once played in a Uriah Heep tribute band that played the whole Uriah Heep live album live, back to back, including a pause that was just as long as you needed to change the sides on the LP. We also bonded over a mutual love for the band Kansas. I invited Lasse to the studio and he thought it was a perfect moment to bring the most expensive guitar in the shop, a Jimmy Page Gibson Les Paul. Once we got there, Lasse realized that the guitar was in a terrible state and he would need to return to the shop and get another one. Expensive guitar, not always a good guitar. It kind of died for me then and there. Lasse picked up a red second-hand Tom Anderson guitar and off he went. Lasse was also a big Creedence Clearwater Revival fan, and his solo on this track is more in that style. I love how it completely clashes with any goth rock intentions I had. In fact, it's one of the best guitar solos on any of the tracks I have ever released. Lasse's timing and phrasing is magical. Sadly, Lasse passed away in 2015. And now Dog. The last classic Uriah Heep song, a fantastic track. Dawn avoided the "why don't you come to our party" part. When I asked why, he said, "This is goth. You don't sing about parties." Okay, little did I know. Cool solo from Dawn's former boss, rest in peace, if I remember right. On one Uriah Heep internet forum, an old school forum long before Facebook, we were written off as two jerks calling themselves Nightingale. They did not like our version. So we're moving forward to the 2025 versions. First, Intermezzo, 2025 version, Dawn. When it became clear that the original Tom Noga version of Intermezzo, called Fontaine, would have to stay off the bonus disc, I thought about making a new version of it, merging the arrangement and sounds of Dog's original recording with my lyrics from the album. Since I don't sing much these days, it's always a bit of a gamble to commit to something that involves my voice. I felt that the bonus disc would not be complete without something that had the vibe from the original version. Dag jumped on the idea, and just days after I presented it to him, he had recorded a new version of it, complete with the original backward guitar loop and the home, home, home sound from my first sampler, the Casio SK1. Since it was about 14 months since I had sung before this session, the first lines were pretty terrible, and it's in the original key, making it super high for me to sing, even in my heyday as a vocalist. What does not kill you makes you stronger, right? In the end, it turned out fantastic. I'm listening to it as I type this, and it turned out exactly how I envisioned it. Quite a rare thing in my world. Goosebumps Deluxe, Part 1. And now Dag. So cool to record something with my brother after 10 years. Great vocals. We used to play this short version live. The weird breathing sound is the A string on a guitar recorded on a Yamaha MT2X Porta Studio. Then I turned the tape around and made a very analog backward sound with a touch of a Yamaha R100 gate reverb. And don't forget the human voice patch from Casio SK1, a very special sampler. Talking of samples, those sounds were sampled with my Roland V30 30 years ago, beyond old school. And then we have Alive Again 2025 version, Dawn. The Closing Chronicles can never be remixed. It might be that the original half-inch tapes are gathering dust somewhere in storage, but even if I found them, they only contain drums, bass and rhythm guitars. One day, searching for the multitracks for my demos for the Edge of Sanity Infernal album, I found some old WAV files labeled EOS-NG. And to my surprise, Alive Again was at the end of the reel. I knew that I had a long journey ahead of me to bring this one to a releasable state, since more than half of the recordings were missing. I always felt that I abandoned this track, which was originally written for Unicorn, in the original album version. I mean, only using such an awesome chorus once is insane. Rather than just trying to rebuild the original version, I would combine recollections from the Alive Again album, which is the continuation of the original version. I then merged the two versions into one super version that, in hindsight, is how I wish it would have been on this album in the first place. Sounds easier said than done though. Even though all the keyboard parts are on a floppy disk somewhere in a box upstairs, without the Atari computer to play it back, all the piano and synth parts had not only to be played again, but also relearned by yours truly, almost 30 years after I wrote and played them. To make matters worse, the analog tape transfer would never sync up to a steady tempo, so I had to send it off to my assistant Mike Lowe for some serious tempo mapping, which turned out to be quite the adventure. In the end, it was decided that we would rather move the music to match the grid rather than adapting the click track to the music. Mike did a fantastic job with this, and I could finally start re-recording everything. I have no idea how many days I spent recording and mixing this track, but when I heard the final version, it was worth every second. The vocal sessions was pretty crazy. I had done the vocals for Intermezzo a few months earlier, so I knew chances were that it would all turn out all right. The first minute of singing were so terrible, I thought it was all over. Something Dag once said about the singer from a very famous heavy metal band's radio broadcast come to mind. It sounded like he had a banana stuck in his throat. It was awful. But instead of giving up, I kept at it and screamed and growled away the strange dropouts in my voice. Probably nothing any vocal coach would recommend, but in the end, I got a whole bunch of good takes. After the usual one-day process of assembling each word's best take, which later goes into Melodyne for a syllable by syllable tuning and timing tweak, I was done. One take Dag added an awesome solo in true Og fashion at the end, echoing his work on the Pandemonium albums. The solo sounds like an evil worm crawling along the walls in the tunnel between life and death. I also used some scratch vocals I found on the original tracks. I reversed them and made them sound as if they were played through an old radio. They are in there somewhere at the end, swirling about in the stereo field, alongside me lying on the floor, screaming into the guitar pickups. I couldn't be happier with the way this one turned out. Goosebumps Deluxe Part 2. And dogs say, I did a pandemonium, listened to the part once, got the key and rocked out. First take. Always the best. This was the mood for the album. No rules. Just do it and it gets released. I understand how the bands in the early 70s felt when you could do just that. I like to spend forever working on stuff in the studio on my own, but I like working fast with others even more. It has to be with the right other people. In this case, it was. Thank you. Yeah, and then there is some stuff about the live versions, about the live version demos that I did, but you have to buy this one to get those, but I will give you a bonus. Steal the Moon original version 1993 liner notes. Last but not least, we have the original version of Steal the Moon, written and recorded for my indie one-man project Morion. This one is by far the coolest track I ever did with this project. You can find the rest of the Morion stuff, and then some, on the Shoegazing compilation on the Swanö merch Bandcamp page. Starting with some finger snapping that goes into a bird whistle flute thing extravaganza, the same flute that we used on Unicorn's Yellow and Greg. And later, I'm behind the drum kit banging away. Morion always had weird stuff like that going on. I played the Faucet typewriter on one of the other songs. Super analog stuff. I think I was going through a phase where I listened to the band Lush too much because the guitar sound was right up their alley. I still think the guitar riff, especially how we play it with Nightingale, is one of the best I've ever written. There is something rock myth about it, and that riff is why the song was picked for this album. And there's a picture of me in a Rick Price t-shirt. Thanks for listening. Bye.